Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I see everyone is signing into audio, but I think you can all hear me, so I will get started. Thank you all so much for being here at this information session about Switzer Fellowships. I'm Erin Lloyd. I'm the program director at the Switzer Foundation, and I am joining you today from the foundation's office in actually sunny Belfast, Maine, which was a bit of a gift. I am lucky enough to have the job of managing the fellowship program, and so I will lead us very briefly through some background about the foundation and then some general information about the fellowship. And then I thought I might start by addressing the top 3 questions that we usually get at this time of year, since I imagine some of you may have those questions. And then we also have Switzer Fellows on the call with us today, at least 2 of whom are going to share some of their perspective, having successfully gone through the fellowship selection process. Are here to add their insight and help us answer questions. And then last but definitely not least, we are joined by Cora Preston, the foundation's network manager. And Cora, would you like to say hello and then offer any housekeeping information? And then I will ask our 2 fellows, Christina and Grant, to introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I will mostly be in the background. Feel free to chat me directly if you have any technical difficulties throughout the event. We will be recording this for your future reference and for anyone who couldn't make it today. And as we go along, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. Please keep your microphones off, and we will just read your questions out via the chat after some brief introduction. So thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks, Cora. I would like to ask Cristina de Jesus Villanueva to introduce herself, and then we'll go to Grant.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Rhode Island right now, and I do my work with my dissertation work on the invasive green iguana here in Puerto Rico, where I am at the moment and where I'm from. And my focus is on exploring the relationship between that species and the agricultural community right now. I think that's it about me. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Christina. Grant.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grant. I am a current Switzer Fellow, year 2021-2022. I'm finishing my PhD at Dartmouth College in a multidisciplinary ecology program, but I'm trained as an environmental anthropologist, and I study the intersections of river restoration and environmental justice out in the Puget Sound region, where I currently am based and am hoping to stay for the near to long-term future. And I'm excited to be here with y'all and looking forward to answering your questions and sharing some insights about the Switzer Fellowship.
Awesome, thank you. Also, I want to acknowledge, is Timneet? Timneet, are you here? Let me see. If Timneet Kafela is here.
I am. Hello.
Yay. Would you like to say hello also? Timneet is also a fellow.
Yeah. I'll just briefly say hello. Hi, my name is Timneet Kafela, and I'm also a current Switzer Fellow with Grant, and I am a PhD candidate at UCSB, where I study microplastics in urban systems.
Great, thank you and welcome. And there are a lot of folks here, which is awesome. So if I'm missing any other Switzer Fellows, maybe you could feel free to chime in at the question and answer session when we have questions that may be best answered by a Switzer Fellow. So I am going to start my hopefully brief overview. And again, hope to keep it brief because the main goal for today is for all of you to be able to ask questions. So as Cora mentioned, feel free to put your questions in the chat and then we will keep track of them and start answering after this initial session. So the Robert and Patricia Switzer Foundation was started back in 1986 by Robert and Patricia Switzer with the proceeds from the sale of the Dayglow Paint Corporation. I would encourage to keep it brief. I won't go into the real background of them today, but I would encourage anyone interested in the fellowship to check out the About Us section of our website, which includes a donor legacy statement, which will kind of give you more information about the Switzer brothers and the evolution of our programs. Basically, through the foundation, they hoped to assist graduate students dedicated to applied environmental problem solving and to encourage them to become leaders prepared to tackle emerging and increasingly complex challenges. Fast forward to the current time, and the foundation has recognized the interconnectedness of environmental and social issues, expanding on what was once really a focus on hard science expertise to include hard science, but also law, policy, advocacy, public health, education, a really broad range of expertise. And so among our fellowship alumni are, of course, scientists, lawyers, community activists, business leaders, teachers, public health experts, people in policy and decision-making positions. It's an incredible group of people who now comprise the Switzer Network. And in fact, there are 700 of them in the network now. And part of what we do is to work really hard to help newer fellows connect with their peers in the network. So the main criteria for becoming a Switzer Fellow is that you are in graduate school at a school based in New England or California, that you plan to be enrolled for the full academic year 2022-2023, which is next year, and that your focus is on environmental improvement through whatever issue you work on and from whatever angle. The benefits to the fellowship include a $15,000 cash reward, engagement with the 700-member Switzer Network, and then access to our other grant programs, all focused on building your leadership and your career once you're done with school. Let's see, applications are due on January 10th, and then I'll talk for a minute about our selection process, which essentially has 3 tiers. In the first tier of review, each application is reviewed by 2 members of the Switzer Network. They will score each application based on a set of criteria that is applied to all of the applications. And then based on a standardized set of those scores, 80 applications will go on to a second tier of review, and that's out of, I'm going to guess, about 250 applications. That second tier is also reviewed by members of the Switzer Network who have not been engaged with the first tier, so it's a new set of eyes. And from that second tier of review, we will determine who moves on to the interview stage, which is basically the third and last stage. So ultimately, 20 applicants will be interviewed from California schools and 20 from New England schools. And then we will select 10 from each region to be the 2022 Switzer Fellows. So this is a fairly complex selection process that takes several months to go through. But the idea is that we bring in as many fellows and voices as we can to help us make this really important decision. I am sure that I have left out important information that you will all ask me about, but right now I would like to invite, we can start with Christina again to add her perspective to anything I just said. And then Christina and Grant will maybe add things that they would have liked to know as they went through the process, or anything about how the fellowship has impacted them. Anything else, Christina and Grant, that you think these folks would benefit from hearing? Yep, there you go.
Yeah, me. Well, about the application process, I just have to say that for me, I reached out to previous fellows by going into the directory that is on the Switzer website, and I looked for anybody in my region. So I'm in the University of Rhode Island, and I just emailed them and said, hey, I saw you have this fellowship. Would you mind me asking you some questions about what a successful application might be? And I got really valuable coaching from Anna Roebuck, who's a fellow also from the University of Rhode Island. And I think that you should feel confident if you go into that directory and see somebody who maybe has experience in a related field, or a field you're interested in, or is in your area, or whatever reason you choose somebody to email them. I'm pretty sure that they're just gonna respond positively. And Grant, do you want to take it? I can tell you about how the fellowship has impacted me, but I don't want to take all the time, so maybe we can go back and forth.
Go back and forth. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think just echoing what Christina says is that I think some people have connections to current or past Switzer Fellows personally, and so it feels easier to reach out to friends and ask for assistance. But I just want to echo Christina that you can search by theme or concept or topic area, and don't hesitate to reach out to current or former Switzer fellows to ask about their experience. And even if it's getting to a stage where you're looking for feedback on your essay or your writing, I think that's something that I can speak for myself. I'd be happy to do, and I think other fellows would feel the same, recognizing that, you know, time is a thing and we can't be helping 95, 100 people each, but I don't think people would be doing that. And I think it's important to just feel empowered and emboldened to do that. I think the network is a very welcoming place, and people are very receptive to curiosity and passion and commitment for the network and the fellowship and the kinds of things that we all dedicate ourselves to doing. So I did that with friends. I have friends, luckily, that were in the network, and I think people shouldn't hesitate to reach out. Another thing too that I just wanted to state is that don't feel discouraged if one year you apply and you don't make it even past the initial screening. That was my experience. I applied one year, and my first year I applied, I didn't even make it past to the second round of 80 applicants. And then, you know, this last year I applied, I was successful in getting the fellowship. So a lot can change in a year. I know that's a little different for PhD students versus master students. The time and program is very different, but definitely think about reapplying and definitely rewriting your essay and thinking about what you have done in that year or 2 years since you applied, and how that really helps speak to your potential to be applied environmental leader. Yeah, I think that's some things. Now, Christina, do you want to talk about like what the fellowship has meant to you, or we can kind of riff on that a little bit?
Christina, you need to unmute again.
I got it. There I am. All right. So what the fellowship has meant for me, I think that the fellowship for me has been a peace of mind in a way, because like Aaron was saying, you get to be connected with this vast number of people in a diverse number of fields. And I sometimes felt like I'm trying to be a conservation biologist for the rest of my life. And I felt like a little bit like, oh, once I graduate, I will never get a job. Nobody wants a conservation biologist, or you have to work for free. And it's, you know, you have to pay the bills even if you are doing work that is supporting your community. So with being in the network, it allows me to see how other people have developed a career in a similar field, but also people are constantly sharing opportunities that they hear about and I wasn't aware about before. So for me, that's super valuable. I'm a 2020 fellow, so I've been in the network since then, but I think that's going to be a continuing theme throughout my life. And that's something really different from other fellowship, because it's like lifelong support, I think. Yeah, that's for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I would echo everything Christina says. And for me, I'm not interested in pursuing an academic career. I think there are a number of reasons that are shaping that decision. And I'm happy to talk with anyone personally that is in a PhD program and is thinking about what the future looks like. And I think that the Switzer Fellowship is a really great opportunity to demonstrate your commitments to applied work, as well as to network with and meet people who have pursued alternative career paths with a PhD. And there are people in the private sector and the public sector working in foundations. And it's a very wide and diverse array of what people choose to do to make positive social and environmental change happen. And so it's been really important for me to kind of see that insight and gain that mentorship and advice, whether it's active or passive, just like looking at people's careers or actually writing to them and having meetings with them, to understand like how do you pitch PhD experience as relevant job experience on a resume, and what are the kinds of things that you should be looking at, what kind of careers are legible to people with PhDs. So that has been really helpful for me.
Thank you both. That's great. It's really that may be the most, hearing from you may be the most valuable thing for folks here. I did want to, Timnit, I'm not going to pressure you to say anything, but if there's anything top of mind for you that you want to add to anything Grant and Christina said.
Sure. I agree with what they both said. That is very much what this fellowship is like. But one thing I want to say too is that, you know, grad school can be kind of daunting. And I've never felt so affirmed in having this idea about bettering the environment and having an inclusive environmental future, as much as talking with people in my cohort or talking with people in past cohorts. Like, that has been really instrumental and helpful in like thinking about how we're going to collaborate and move forward when coming up with like different solutions. So that's one thing I did want to emphasize, that the people in this program are truly awesome and are such kind and visionary individuals. And I think that anybody who gets to be part of this family is truly lucky.
Thank you all. It's great. Really appreciate that. So I think we should move on to questions, and sorry, I'm having technical difficulty here. I'm just going to go through the top 3 questions that we get, just because I know they'll come up, and then we'll open it up to, I see a lot of questions are coming in on the chat, so we'll do the best we can to get to all of them. So first, very common question. Lots of folks ask about their eligibility in relation to where they are in their master's or PhD or JD program, or whatever program you're in. So if you are a master's student in a traditional 2-year program, you would apply during the first year of your program. The fellowship would then support the second year of your program. If you're a master's student in a 3-year program, like sometimes a dual degree program, or if you're in a JD program, which we actually consider part of the master's pool, you would do the same, but you'd kind of have an added benefit of having another chance to apply the following year if you didn't get it the first year. And the fellowship would then support either the second or third year of your program. If you're in a 1-year master's program, like a professional degree program, you would need to apply before you are in your program, because the fellowship would support you during that 1-year program. If this is you, you can apply before you have received word that you've been accepted to your program, but you would just need to have been accepted by the time of the interviews in May. For PhD students, we ask that you apply after a certain point in your studies, because we are really focused on supporting fellows who will go on to applied work, which can be in a university setting, as long as you, in that case, if you can be really clear about how you will apply your work outside of academia, in addition to whatever teaching or research you're doing. And we have found over the years that people who are farther along in their programs are better able to articulate how they will do that, and are therefore more competitive. So if you're a PhD student, you will need to either be finished with 3 years of your program by July 1st, 2022, or have passed your qualifying exams by that date. And I know there will be probably clarifying questions about that, and we'll take those shortly. Second very common question, who should write your recommendation letters? The short answer is anyone who can speak from experience about your commitment to environmental work and your leadership skills or potential. This can be your advisor, a professor in your department, or someone who worked with you in the past or with whom you work now. As long as they can speak from personal experience and perhaps offer some examples, that's great. And we leave it up to you who those people are. I will say that oftentimes PhD applicants will have 2 letters from people in their department or their school, simply because you're in it for the long haul, and that is the water you've been swimming in, and that is totally fine. Oftentimes master's students who have just entered their programs will have at least 1 letter from someone outside of their academic department, like someone they work with, and that's also great. It's really up to you. Third and final very common question, what are we looking for in a fellow? This is probably the hardest one to answer, because the Switzer Fellowship supports such a broad range of topical expertise. This is actually a really fair question. We're not an issue funder. We are supporting environmental leaders, and that may be you. Your exact topical focus is certainly of interest, but only insofar as it has to be under this broad umbrella of environment. Now, because issues of environment and social justice overlap so deeply in many cases, we really value people who may be doing both. There definitely needs to be an environmental component and a commitment to environmental problem solving, but if you're doing that through a social justice lens, that's of interest to us. You don't need to be doing biology or engineering or chemistry, although we love those too. We just look for people who, even if they're not directly working on issues of environmental justice, can show us that they understand, the social justice implications of their work. So you may be doing some type of ecology work that doesn't work directly with human communities, and that's fine. But you at least need to be able to articulate your understanding of any of the ways in which that work might impact certain human communities. I guess the last thing I'll say about what we're looking for in a fellow is I would suggest, if you haven't already, check out the profiles of our current fellows, the 2021 fellows, which you can find on the website under the Become a Fellow tab. I think that this group is beautifully representative of what we're looking for in the Switzer Network. And so I think, unless Christina or Grant, if you have anything you'd want to add to that, we can do that, or we can move on to questions in the chat, which Cora has agreed to read to me.
Great.
Or Grant, did Grant?
Oh, I was just going to say nothing to add, because I think a lot of the questions in the chat will give us opportunities to. Thanks.
Okay.
I thought we would start with a few questions that have been coming in about eligibility. So we had a question from Sierra, who is planning to finish her master's degree in December of 2022. Would she be eligible?
Unfortunately, no, because the fellowship is intended to support the entire academic year. So it's really intended to support people who are going to be in school from fall 2022 through spring 2023. So if Sierra, you decide to extend your program to the spring, then yes. But otherwise, if you're finished in December, I'm sorry, we would miss you.
We just had another one that's related, is about what if they don't know if they will graduate or not within that period of time.
I assume that question means you may graduate sooner, but you aren't sure yet. And if that's the case, I think I would encourage you to probably apply, because if you do end up being there, I assume you would know by the time of the, sometime this spring. And you could tell us if your status changes. But I think if it turns out that you will be a full, fully enrolled for the entire year, you wouldn't have wanted to miss this opportunity.
Great. We had a question from Ariel about they completed a PhD in 2020 and they're now in a master's program. Does having a prior PhD disqualify someone from applying?
No, absolutely not. It's a great question, but we have a lot of our fellows actually have multiple degrees, so that's totally fine. We would just you would be considered with the master's pool, and you would just follow the eligibility guidelines for master's students.
Great. And then we have folks asking about if they're a third-year PhD student and haven't risen to candidacy yet, would it be more competitive to apply later in their program?
I think if you will have risen to candidacy by July 1st, you would be welcome to apply this year. I think, there's kind of pluses and there's pros and cons. Like I think later in your program, you probably will be more competitive, but you may be perfectly competitive this year. The pro is that the more experience you have, the better able to articulate your applied goals. The cons are that, you run out of time to apply. And so I think, like Grant mentioned, applying more than once, which is a thing that you could do as long as they've reached candidacy by July 1st, you can apply this year.
Great. We'll stay on the eligibility theme and then open it up to the questions that might make more sense for fellows to answer in a moment, but we've got a bunch of these, so we'll stay on the topic, I think. So we had someone ask if someone works full-time, but they're still enrolled as a full-time student, would that have any impact on their eligibility? Nope,
that's fine. As long as you're fully enrolled, I say good luck to you. Full-time student and full-time work. That's great. That's fine. Yep.
Great. And then let's see. We had someone ask, Christopher asked about if their studies are in computer science, with applications to sustainability and environmental conservation and would be eligible.
Yes, I think what you would need to do is just talk in your essay about how what you're doing relates to your commitment to environmental improvement.
Great. And then another question, if offered the fellowship, would they still be able to participate in the fellowship if they also received a separate fellowship that only funds the summer or some other portion of time?
Absolutely, yes. And this is another, actually, this is another common question. The Switzer Foundation has we don't prohibit you from having other fellowships. Other fellowships sometimes prohibit other fellowships, so you would just want to check with that other one that you have to make sure that we wouldn't be a conflict for them. But as far as we're concerned, no problem.
Great. So let's see. We had a question from Miriam about how can master's students best craft a competitive application without the specific research focus or experience of many PhD students?
Great question. And actually, we are really encouraging master's students to apply. We've had really great PhD applicants, and the number of master's applicants in recent years has gone down a little bit. So we're really encouraging master's students to apply, and it is totally fine if you don't have like the specific research focus that a PhD has. It's really more about your what you plan to do, how you plan to be a change maker on environmental issues, and what your commitment level is, and what kind of leadership aspects will you bring to your issue. That answer.
Can I just add something there,
Yes.
Erin and
Yep.
Cora? I think the way it was explained to me, and I think what I've seen being true, is that Switzer is interested in funding the person more than the project, in the sense of it's not like a academic granting agency, and we all recognize that our interests shift and our projects shift and our professional dedications shift, but making the case for why you are going to make positive environmental change, I think that is the focus area of the fellowship and the materials. So I hope that answers that question around master's versus PhD. It's like who you are as a leader, as a potential leader, and not what your project is necessarily.
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, that's great.
Great. Let's see. Then we had a question about if folks apply and get rejected, do they get feedback to help improve the application for the next year?
Yes, particularly if you make it to the interview stage, because then we just sort of have more information to give you because your interviewers have met you and they've interacted with you. But we also can give feedback if you request it from anyone who has applied and did not and was not selected. The feedback is a little bit, yeah, like I said, the feedback is a little more detailed when you have made it to the interview stage, and probably more helpful. But actually, let me just add that you should ask for it, because we don't give the feedback to everyone unless they actually ask for it, which you can do. You can ask me.
Great. We had some questions about the recommendation letters. So we had a couple different master's students ask. So there's two questions I'm going to try to combine into one here. As a second-year master's student, would it still be okay to have a recommender from a prior academic program, or would it be most competitive to seek someone from their current department? And then the other question that's related to that is it recommended to have one each of a recommender from the academics and from work experience, or is that just really up to the applicant?
It really is up to the applicant. I will say, as far as getting, choosing between which academic place to get your recommendation letter from, it doesn't really matter to us whether you do it from the current program or like a prior program. I think probably the more recent, the better. but it's up to you. It's whichever person can really speak to your leadership attributes is really the one to go with. And as far as getting like one from prior work and one from academic, I think, you know, I think the benefit to that is it may give a more well-rounded picture of you, and you may get different, you know, different types of feedback in each kind of letter. So I think in a perfect world, sure, I would say maybe one from work, one from prior work, and one from academic, but we don't live in a perfect world. And if you have two great references from an academic place, that's fine. You should go with those.
Grant or Christina or Timnit, do any of you want to share about, you know, your thoughts on choosing recommenders?
I'll share something. I think one of my recommenders was the coordinator for the Caribbean Climate Hub, which is a part of the U.S. Forest Service that produces information and recommendations for farmers to deal with climate change. But it's not an academic space, but I think that since the place where I was doing the volunteer work is very much focused on environmental issues and improving people's adaptability to climate change, then I chose the coordinator for that. So, and we have a very close relationship, you know, so she knew me at the personal level. And then I think going back to what Grant was saying, that you're being funded for who you are as a potential leader or a potential person who's going to have impact in whatever subject you are focusing on regarding environmental issues, then somebody who knows you and your desire to do that is valuable, more so than somebody who knows that you published a paper in 2015. I don't know, just a random date. And I've read a few applications when people reached out to me and regarding the application process and helping them with it. And I have to say that if you're, because my experience is with natural sciences, but if you're a natural sciences major, you probably have written a few personal statements that have to do really heavily with the research you're doing. And this is not that. You have to focus on the applied part of your work and the implications it might have and the broader scheme. And so for me, a way to place my work within the broader scheme, something that helps us talking to people who are in the social sciences and work with natural science, because they are more, at least in my experience, they were more attuned to the social aspect of scientific research at the natural sciences. So yeah, give yourself some time to talk to people if you're in natural sciences that can help you place your work in the broader aspect, and don't focus on what type of results you're going to produce, or unless that's relevant to the application part. But yes, I think, yeah, I definitely didn't want to leave without saying that it's very much a gear change for your brain to go from personal statements regarding science to personal statements regarding applications of that science. Yes, please.
Thanks, Christina. That's great.
I was going to invite Grant or Timnit to add anything to that if they have anything.
In terms of recommenders, I had two recommenders. I selected someone who could really attest to my leadership and my work that I do around UCSB, because I work with the Center for Science and Engineering Partnerships, but that had nothing to do with what is specifically my program or my research. So I chose a recommender who could just attest to that solely about like what I do and my vision just in general when it comes to environmental leadership. And then for my second letter, I chose someone who could attest to my research ability and my ability as a scientist, which was my advisor. So I kind of like ensured that when selecting my recommenders, it would create this well-rounded picture of who I am, not just like solely understood as a scientist, but also understood as somebody who does a lot of organizing, advocacy, and social justice work as well.
Thank you. Grant, did you have anything to add? Nope. All right, thank you both.
Lydia just asked a question about that I answered in the chat, and I'll state as well, is that there are guidelines for recommenders that we have shared on our website. So if you find them on our FAQs or on our eligibility page, you'll be able to give some guidelines to your recommenders.
Yep, that's right. I think it's on the how to apply page, and it's also linked once you get into the application. There's a link to those instructions in the application, and then it will actually, it's like an automated system, and it will send those instructions to your recommender once you put in that person's contact information.
We just had an interesting question from Jesse, who has 2 co-advisors, and they like to co-write and sign recommendation letters. Is that okay?
That's a really interesting question, because what this did come up once last year. I think the short answer is yes, it's okay. It does. I mean, we limit the recommendation letter. If they're both writing, if they're contributing to one letter, then it's okay. I think you're limited to 2 letters. And so, you know, if they're each writing their own letter, then that would be your 2 letters.
We have some more questions about the review process. One question is about what are the funds intended to support? Are they for research, supplies, travel? Erin, can you take that one?
I can. Yes, they are fairly unrestricted. They are meant to cover your school-related expenses, and that can include living expenses. It can include, you know, mortgage, rent, heating, whatever. It can include, you know, research, travel, equipment, books, university fees, anything that you can argue would relate to your schooling is allowed under the cash award.
Great. And then we had a question about what are some common red flags that reviewers see in rejected applications?
That's a good one. I think, you know, one of the most common things is when people are not clearly articulating environmental, like, what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? Like, this is what I'm doing now. This is what I'm doing in school, but this is how doing that is going to allow me to do this thing later on. I think when people aren't sure, maybe they're a little vague, or they don't, you know, give a clear picture, that's one thing that can sort of move you from the yes to the category. I think if there's anything, I think that may be, and I think the other thing maybe is not offering us a clear picture of your leadership potential, which would show up in your essay, but also in your recommendation letters.
Thanks. We had a related question that just came in about the review. Are you able to elaborate on the scoring used? What determines if an application will proceed from the second round or from the first round of review to the interviews?
Yeah, I actually don't have, there's basically a set of, I think it's 10 criteria, all of which you can, we don't specifically list them out on our website, although that's actually something we should probably think about doing. But it's everything we're looking at is embedded in the guidelines on the website. There's nothing surprising. We're not evaluating you on anything you don't see there. And so there are, you know, each application gets scored by both of the reviewers, and then those scores are standardized. And then we look at those, and that's how we determine what moves on to the next round. And I'm not sure if I didn't answer your question. I would say feel free to email me directly, and I can share more about that.
Great. And then we had a question about what parts of the application do reviewers see or have access to during the review process? Is it everything or just the essay? Are the applications anonymized during the review process?
They are not anonymized. They see everything except, I believe, the sections that talk about your financial need, because this is not a need-based, and those questions have been minimized. There really aren't that. I think there may be a few, and it doesn't ask for like income or anything like that, but the reviewers do not see that information because since this is not a need-based fellowship, it's a merit-based fellowship. that information only comes into play if at the end of the day, there are two exactly equal candidates. Everything is great on both of them. And the only, deciding factor might be this one, might have more need, but the reviewers do not see that. That would not come into play until we get to the interview stage. But they do see your name and the other information.
We had a question from Sophia about how does Switzer Fellowship funding impact financial aid from the institution we're enrolled at? And my quick answer to that would be to check with your institution, because it might be different depending from place to place.
Yeah, actually, I'll ask our fellows who are here. Do you know if there was any impact for you if you did have financial aid? I don't know the answer to that either.
I think PhDs are a little tricky in that way.
Yeah.
It was easy for me to kind of just write it off as a research fellowship, like it's supporting my research, and that doesn't impact my graduate stipend. But I know at Dartmouth that if I were to accept pay, like a full-time job or any sort of job more than 10 hours a week, I would lose my Dartmouth funding. So as long as and the Switzer is very clear that this is about supporting research or school-related expenses, then it didn't impact my funding.
Okay. Yeah, I think if there's any doubt, I would. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, for me, it didn't have any impact. I just wanted to say I'm at the University of Rhode Island, and they have a policy that the university can't tell you to not get another job because you're a free human being. You can, if you want to have 4 jobs, that's up to you, but you have like standards to keep up with your academic progress. So no, it did not affect it at all. I don't think they even care. But yeah, I guess that varies by institution. So yeah, check with your university about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. At UCSB, it really didn't affect anything. But just check in with your institutions, because institutions have specific guidelines about this.
Thank you.
Great. So let's see. We had a question. We had a few questions about the issues or themes or characteristics. And so Edith asked, are there particular environmental themes, issues, or candidate profile characteristics that are of greater interest to the committee for this year? And the answer is no.
That's right. Yeah, no, we are not limiting to certain topics or people, doing certain types of work. We're really, we're open to anything under the very broad umbrella of environment. So.
We had a related question on that front from Mandy about, can you clarify what is meant by environmental improvement as the major research qualification? Does that mean restoration and rehabilitation? Does it also include environmental protection and conservation? So Erin, if you can start, and then we can have the fellows weigh in on that a little bit too.
Yeah, it really is sort of a catch-all term for anybody working who has an environmental commitment in their work. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not just restoration. It could be anything. It could be like policy work. You're trying to improve environmental policy. It could be, environmental justice work. You're trying to improve environmental conditions in a certain community. So yeah, it definitely, there is not, it's really just a catch-all term. So I would invite, Timney, Christina, or Grant, any thoughts you have on that? Or if not.
No, I have thoughts. Yes, I think that that's what I was trying to touch on earlier by saying that when we, as natural scientists, we're so used to looking at our research first and the applications second. And I think you really have to work to turn that around and think of the applications first and where it sits within different conservation, different environmental issues. So I was just browsing my application to see what I said. And because I work in a very specific topic, which is green iguanas in farms in Puerto Rico. But my goal is not to work with the green iguana in farms in Puerto Rico. My goal is to get tools to understand how to address problems that have an environmental nature and a human component so that we can solve them. So that's what I focused on in my application. I didn't focus on the green iguana as a research specimen. And I noted in my application that my goal was to take these experiences of working with people and working with the environment and move them toward a conservation organization where I can lead projects that use those tools, like use science and relationships with people to solve environmental issues. But that was the connection to my current research, but my application wasn't about my research. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. I am happy to share my application. I was just looking, I have a redacted version where my personal information is not there. So if it's fine, I can put that in the chat and anybody can download it if they want.
That's nice. Thank you, Christina.
Oh yeah, okay.
Great.
Yeah, so similar to what Christina said, I think a lot of it has to do with application, specifically the bigger picture of environmental leadership, the themes of environmental leadership that you have implemented in your journey. Personally, I did talk about my research in my essay, but it was just like explaining why my research is essentially a bridge to what I want to do, which is prevention, pollution prevention. I'm not really, I guess it falls under environmental improvement, but really what I study is just pollution presently. So how I kind of not spend it, but like how I kind of crafted the story was that the goal of that was to inform policymakers moving forward, right? So just trying to understand, you can use your research, like a short paragraph of your research, to kind of explain or like provide a compass of where you're going career-wise. That's something too, if you would like to mention your research that I did that I thought was helpful in creating a bigger picture of who I am and what I do.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up with like maybe two other examples. Like I'm just thinking from my PhD program. So for example, I had a peer that studies persistent meadows in the Oregon Coast Range. And so he was trying to understand why some meadows are meadows and some meadows become forests. And that's a really compelling ecological question. But the thing that becomes compelling to Switzer folks are, how can understanding that shape Indigenous environmental stewardship of the Oregon Coast Meadow Range, or how can it improve Indigenous access to cultural resources? For example, I used to work in Chile with social movements, and I could, as an anthropologist, contribute to social theory around social movement organizing. But if I could also demonstrate how my scholarship promotes Indigenous recognition of watershed stewardship and watershed conservation, that is an environmental improvement. So it's taking that step from the theoretical research to how is this driving in positive environmental benefit? And it doesn't have to be, those are two human dimensions. They don't have to be, promoting human improvement and human benefit. But I think that is the leap that I think Switzer is asking folks to make.
Great. Thank you all. Cora, I am noticing that we have about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and get as many of your questions as we can. If for those of you who we don't get to your question, really feel free to email me directly and I would be happy to answer your question.
Great. We had a question again about the review process, about if we can clarify how diversity is incorporated into the scoring system, if so.
Well, first of all, we look at diversity across many levels. We look at topical diversity, school diversity, geographical diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, the diversity of the people themselves and diversity of what you're doing. That in and of itself is not scored. The scores are the scores. And then, however, as we're moving through each tier in the process, we make sure that the people who are advancing are representative of the pool as a whole. So it's not scored, but it is taken into account. I will say, however, one thing that is scored, and this is sort of related, is how your application shows your ability to understand the social equity dimensions of your work. So that is a thing that is scored. It's not looking at diversity of each of the applicant themselves, but it's talking about how you understand certain issues of diversity in your work. Hopefully that answers your question. And if it doesn't, again, really feel free to email me. And I think that since this question has come up, it strikes me that we may, as we're thinking about our guidelines for next year, that we may want to be clear about that in the actual guidelines themselves. So thank you for the question.
Great. We had a question about if someone has strong similarities to past awardees, would that be a disadvantage?
No, I mean, we have such a broad array of past awardees. I don't even know. No, it's definitely not a disadvantage. So yeah, not at all.
Great. We also had a question about, is there a limit on the number of applicants or fellows from each school?
No, although what we try to do is have a diversity of schools in the fellowship cohort. So I can't remember how many schools we have in this 2021 cohort. I want to say it might be like 14 out of the 20 fellows. So there's not a limit per se, but it's one of the things that we look at as we're making the selections as we go along each tier of the review. Making sure we have a diversity of schools that move forward to the next thing.
Great. Another quick technical question. Is there a page limit on how long the resume can be? And, you know, Aaron, if you could answer that from if there's actually a limit, and then Grant, if you could elaborate on what you shared in the chat, that would be great.
There is actually no page limit. You can upload whatever, you know, it's not like going to cut you off, but what we do ask in the application, and this is especially true for PhD students, that you not include like a whole CV, but instead like a pretty concise resume, because the reviewers are going to be reviewing multiple applications, and I think aren't necessarily going to have time to read and understand the nuances of your whole, you know, 8-page or whatever CV, but trying to be concise and really displaying the most important things in a resume format. So I would say, you know, 2 pages, if you can do that, would be great.
It
seems like there's
an array of folks from what Grant and Christina to me have shared. Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think it just speaks to that there's quite a diversity. I definitely am trained by an advisor in an aesthetic style of to say the most with the least is a skill. And so I have really internalized that. And so my resume is like 1 page long. But it seems like there were clearly other successful candidates who did not follow that. So yeah, I think Aaron's advice probably holds the most weight here. But yeah, it seems like it might be good for all of us to share our resumes. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm giving you the what we would like to see, not necessarily, you know, it's not necessarily true across the board. And again, it's not going to cut you off. You can upload what you upload, but the reviewers would appreciate brevity.
I did bold a lot of it, like so you could skip over, but it was very long. It was very long. Sorry about that. Yeah, you also sorry about that.
I think the bolding probably helped.
Yeah.
So see, it's not a deal breaker, everyone.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but Grant, I think you answered this question in the chat, but I thought maybe you could elaborate on it. Michelle asked, is there any advice for those in early state environmental careers who made a recent transition to environmental work to prepare a strong application?
Yeah, I'm happy to say what I said to Michelle is that, like, I think what you're trying to do is just like, to use awful language, is like sell yourself, like use what could be seen as like a weakness as a strength, like take this compelling story that's kind of one of these like hooks, like these aha moments. Like, I was working in this field, but now I'm doing this, and here's how they relate to each other. I think it's just a really compelling story to tell, and it might set you aside in an otherwise standard pool of people. Like, I loved rivers since I was 5. That's like my story. And so there might be a lot of people that tell that story, and that might not be your story, and that might be really compelling. So I would just think about that in a strategic way more than anything.
Yeah, I would second that. We definitely, we do like to get applications from what I'm going to call mid-career fellows. I don't know if you're a mid-career person, but I do think sometimes having that extra level of experience and perspective can be really helpful.
Great. Well, we had a final question. I think we're doing really well at getting through our list. So well done, everyone. We had a question from Joanna about what were some of the most memorable applications and what made them memorable. So I don't know what you can think of, maybe Erin, to share on that.
That is a great question. And I think what I'm going to say is that the really most memorable ones are the ones that tell us, tell a personal story, tell us about you, even, with your quirks and your, not everybody's career goes straight. We are, if you have an interesting story to tell, those are the applications we remember, the people who are, brave and tell us honestly how they came to where they are, even if it's, circuitous or whatever. There was one fellow who said in his essay that he swam like some ridiculous, it wasn't like the English Channel, but it was something like that, like these little nuggets that stick with you and stick with the reviewers. So if you have any little nuggets, I would definitely encourage you to use them if they're at all relevant. But I might actually see if Christina, Grant, or if Timnit is still here, if you included anything that you think in your essay that you kind of wondered about and that decided to go with it. I don't know.
While you're thinking about that, that also kind of speaks to Alessandra's question that just came in about if it's encouraged to include some narrative in the personal essay and advice on how to avoid being cliched. And it sounds like, yes, including some, personal elements to help folks get to know you a little bit is recommended. Anything else on that?
I think narrative is great. Not as my style, but I think, I think it's important to like try to put yourself, as Erin has been suggesting, in a reviewer's shoes where they're volunteering their time. They might be reading these late at night. They are reading a lot or not a lot. And so just giving them something compelling and an easy road in is going to be it's just going to help you in the long run. And yeah, if you struggle with writing or struggle with narrative, I don't think it's about being the most writerly person as much as it is about telling a compelling story.
Right. Yeah, I would second that. You don't have to be, yes, good writing is always appreciated, but we really do take the time to get to the essence of what you're saying. And so if you're not a perfectly polished writer, that is okay. Just make sure you're telling us your story, as open, as honestly, and as you can.
Well, we've hit our time. Thank you to Grant and Christina and Timnit for sharing your wisdom and experience. Thank you, Erin. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We're excited for you to be considering applying, and we encourage you to apply and look forward to your applications.
Yes, I echo all of that. And I also want to just say one more thing, and that is if you are going to take Christina's advice and find somebody who already is a fellow to kind of walk you through the application or, offer you some perspective, and you can't find anybody at your school, feel free to email me. I would be happy to connect you with a past Switzer fellow. And good luck, everybody.